not only were there more than half a dozen large Russian posts in the region, but the Russians fully intended to settle the coastline all the way down to Vancouver Island and Nootka Sound. When we think of the early settlement of Alaska, we appropriately think of the Russians, but the Spanish made a bid for Alaska too. Several, actually. Remember, the Spanish had originally claimed virtually all of America, except for the Portuguese slice we call Brazil. That's way back in 1494, with the signing of the Treaty of Tordesillas. Less than 2 decades later, in 1513, Vasco Núñez de Balboa crossed the Isthmus of Panama and laid eyes on the Pacific Ocean. Then he walked into the water until he was knee-deep, and he held up a sword in one hand, and he had an image of the Virgin Mary in the other hand, and he claims possession of the new ocean and all adjoining lands in the name of the Spanish monarchy. But over the next quarter millennium, the Spanish never settled or even explored the northwestern coast of North America. It was the Russian appearance in Alaska that first seriously threatened the Spanish claim here. And as the Russian presence became more permanent and seemed poised to spread southward, the Spanish, based at San Blas on the western coast of Mexico, felt compelled to dispatch multiple expeditions north along the Pacific coastline in the hopes of shoring up their own claims to the region and of creating a buffer between New Spain in the south and the pesky Russians in the north. Between 1774 and 1793, okay, so that's just 19 years, the Spanish organized and carried out no less than 13 separate voyages from Mexico north. Their mission to buoy up Spanish claims, to map the area, to make other scientific observations, to establish friendly relations with indigenous peoples if encountered, and to survey Russian and rumored British activity in the region. In 1774, Juan José Pérez Hernández, a veteran of the Spanish galleons sailing the long Pacific trade routes linking the Spanish Philippines with the Americas, sailed from San Blas with the directive to sail to 60 degrees north latitude. This would have taken him as far as Alaska, but he never made it that far. Shortly after passing the 54 degrees north latitude, he turned around due to lack of provisions. Well, the next year, 1775, a second Spanish expedition was launched, this time under the leadership of Bruno de Heceta and Juan Francisco de la Bodega y Cuadra. Battling bad weather and scurvy, they made their way up the modern-day California coastline. Well, Heceta turned back off the coast of modern-day Washington, but Bodega kept going, determined to fulfill his mission by locating the Russians. Well, pushing north, Bodega almost reached Sitka, but having yet to spy any Russians, he turned around, though he made sure to make a landing so that he could officially claim the Northwest for Spain. Bodega's voyage produced the first accurate map of North America's Pacific Northwest coastline. Well, in 1779, Bodega returned on another expedition, charting the coastline up to Alaska in even more detail. Unfortunately for the Spanish, the journal of one of Bodega's lieutenants fell into English hands and was immediately translated and published in London. One of those who made quick use of the journal and who'd closely studied the expeditions of Vitus Bering was Captain James Cook, who went searching for the Northwest Passage in 1778. One member of his crew, by the way, William Bligh of Mutiny on the Bounty fame, but that's another story. Well, Cook charted the coast from Nootka Sound in the south all the way across southern Alaska. He explored the body of water that would come to bear his name, the Cook Inlet, and then he continued on to the Aleutian Islands, but he never found the passage. One of Cook's lieutenants on the voyage, George Vancouver, returned to the Pacific Northwest, leading a voyage of his own between 1791 and 1795, likewise concluding there was no Northwest Passage, at least south of the Bering Strait. But for the Spanish, the issue here was British machinations in the Pacific Northwest. Combined with British and Russian fur trading activity in the area, the voyages of men like Cook were worrisome developments indeed. My stabilizer just broke and I'm in the middle of nowhere, so I'm gonna have to stick the camera on a rock. I'm sorry about that, can't be moving around. But in any case, another expedition set sail from San Blas in 1788, this one led by Seville native José Esteban Martinez. Now, Martinez's two ships reached Kodiak Island, where the natives informed them that the Russians were close. Finally, the Spanish reached the Russian post at Three Saints Bay, where the Russian leader, Evstrat Belorov, shared a Russian map of Alaska's coastline and informed the Spanish that not only were there more than half a dozen large Russian posts in the region, but the Russians fully intended to settle the coastline all the way down to Vancouver Island and Nootka Sound. Well, when the expedition went on to visit a Russian post on Unalaska Island, the Russians were happy to share their maps of the Aleutians. But they reiterated their intention to settle the coast all the way down to Vancouver Island. The Martinez expedition's visit to Unalaska, by the way, marks the furthest west the Spanish ever went in Alaska. Well, the next year, 1789, the Spanish dispatched another expedition, again led by Martinez, charged with taking control of Nootka Sound before the Russians could do the same thing. Martinez founded a Spanish colony on Vancouver Island called Santa Cruz de Nuca. When British ships appeared to build a base of their own in the area, these are fur traders and merchants, by the way, Martinez seized them. Now, when news of the ship seizures reached London, the British government was, of course, furious, and the British Royal Navy was mobilized. In fact, the Nootka crisis might have spiraled out of control at this point. The Dutch mobilized their navy in support of their British allies. The Spanish, of course, mobilized their navy. The French mobilized their navy in support of their Spanish allies. But in the end, and after a series of agreements known as the Nootka Conventions, the Spanish finally renounced their monopoly on trade and their claims to much of the territory in the region. Without settlements, such claims could simply not be defended anymore. Well, from their base at Nootka Sound in 1790, the Spanish sent an expedition north under the leadership of Salvador Fidalgo. Now, Fidalgo explored Prince William Sound, Cordova Bay, and Port Valdez, this area right here. The expedition encountered a Russian post while exploring the Cook Inlet, went on to Kodiak Island, where Fidalgo observed another Russian post, and explored English Bay, where Fidalgo visited the Russian settlement of Alexandrovsk, not far from modern-day Anchorage. Almost everywhere he went, Fidalgo claimed the territory for Spain, even though there's these other settlements from these other countries. Anyway, the next year, a Spanish scientific expedition led by Alejandro Malaspina, a Tuscan veteran of an around-the-world voyage, and José de Bustamante Higuera, a veteran of the Mediterranean wars against the Barbary pirates. These guys surveyed much of the Alaskan coastline. The Spanish crown had high hopes for this voyage, specifically that it would outshine the voyages of James Cook. At Yakutat Bay, where Malaspina and Bustamante hoped to discover the Northwest Passage, the expedition made contact with the Tlingit. Spanish researchers, members of the expedition, took the opportunity to make anthropological notes about the Tlingit, while Spanish artists, also along for the exploration, produced high-quality graphical representations of Tlingit life. At one point, a cultural misunderstanding that might have spiraled, as so many do, into tragedy was nipped in the bud when a pair of Spanish trousers or pants stolen by some of the Tlingit were wisely returned by order of the local Tlingit chief. Spanish artist Jose Cardero captured the episode in a drawing aptly entitled "Return of the Stolen Trousers." But no Northwest Passage was found, motivating the expedition's naming of one inlet Bahia de Desengano, Disenchantment Bay, still its name today. Meanwhile, Alaska's largest glacier, Malaspina Glacier, takes its name from this expedition too, obviously. And by the way, Malaspina later became convinced that Spain should free all of its colonies and instead form a federation of independent states linked by trade. For this and other opinions, he was imprisoned for 6 years, then exiled from Spain. Well, in the end, and despite centuries of claims, Spain never actually controlled Alaskan territory. But the perceived Russian threat from Alaska motivated the Spanish to establish presidios and missions in the region they called Upper California, at San Diego in 1769, at Monterey in 1770, at San Francisco in 1776, with great historical consequence. Thank you so much for watching to the end. I really appreciate that. If you want me to keep creating content like this, consider becoming my patron over on patreon.com. Also follow me on Instagram, where weekly I issue updates as well as a set of history challenges, a little more engagement there. It's a lot of fun. We'll see you there.